Hey there! Today we are cooking with salmon, puff pastry, spinach, lemons, spices, cheese, an egg, and some breadcrumbs. On this episode of What Do You Make of This, I'm going to teach you how to make a show-stopping Salmon Wellington. But don't worry, it's a lot easier than it looks. Salmon Wellington is such a spectacular dish to know how to make. If you've never had it before, it is salmon and creamed spinach, wrapped in a puff pastry and baked until it becomes golden and flaky and buttery. And the best part is, because it's ready from start to finish in about 30 minutes, it is the perfect recipe for a special occasion when that special occasion lands on a busy weeknight. Let me show you how to make it. So the first thing we're going to get started with is going to be the spinach filling. And I do want to give you fair warning. For every Salmon Wellington recipe I have seen, they start with fresh spinach and finely chopped onion, finely chopped garlic. You saute it all until the spinach has wilted down. And that takes about 20 minutes. And then that defeats the purpose of a speedy special occasion dinner. So I have figured out a few hacks to speed things along without compromising the flavor. And I'm going to show you my secrets. So the first trick is going to be using frozen spinach. So what I've done is I have defrosted the spinach. I have squeezed out all the water. Per Salmon Wellington serving, you want about 1/4 cup of this thawed, squeezed out spinach. If your spinach has come in one of those bricks, it's basically going to be about 1/4 brick per serving. Get that out of the way. So to this spinach, we're going to brighten the flavors up a little bit with just some lemon zest. Now, I've got a lot of lemon zest here. I zested an entire lemon. We're not putting all of that into a single serving. Really what you want is about a pinch. That's probably going to work out to about 1/4 teaspoon of lemon zest. But that little bit of lemon zest is going to add so much brightness to a dish that's actually quite rich. It needs that to cut through a lot of the heaviness. So speaking of heaviness, next thing we're going to go in with is some cream cheese. This is plain cream cheese. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons per serving. Now, let me find a spoon here. If you really want to help cut some corners and speed things up, you can absolutely use an urban garlic cream cheese. It's going to put a lot of flavor in there without any extra work. But for the sake of showing you how this whole thing comes together, I wanted to start with some actual fresh, just plain cream cheese. I'm just going to leave that little bit behind so I don't get my hands dirty. Okay, and to this cream cheese, we're also going to use some Parmesan cheese. So here I'm going to do about 1 tablespoon of Parmesan. So what the cream cheese is going to do is it's going to make everything really nice and rich and smooth. The Parmesan, as it melts down, is going to be kind of the binder that helps it all stick together. It's kind of the glue. I also noticed I lost a little piece of lemon zest, so we'll get that in the bowl. So to this, I'm also going to come in with some breadcrumbs. Now these are just breadcrumbs in a can. You can buy them at the grocery store. I'm using seasoned breadcrumbs, but you can also use panko breadcrumbs. If you don't have breadcrumbs, you can crunch up crackers, and in a pinch, I've even made a piece of toast, crushed that up, and used that as my breadcrumbs. So lots of options. I'm just using the canned stuff today. This is going to be not very much. About 1/2 teaspoon of breadcrumbs is all you need. And the reason we're putting the breadcrumbs in is because as this cooks, the spinach is going to start to release a lot of water. The breadcrumbs will absorb that and keep your dish from becoming soggy, so do not leave that part out. Okay, so I'm going to start just by mixing these things together first, just to kind of get them a little incorporated before we season. And that will help to make sure that none of the spices get kind of stuck in one spot, because you do want it to be very evenly seasoned. So I'm just going to start by mashing this together, and because of the cheese and the breadcrumbs, it's almost going to make something between like a paste and a dough. It's very interesting by the time it all comes together, what it looks like. So work at it just a little bit here, just to try to get things evenly distributed. But it doesn't have to be perfectly mixed yet, because we're going to season, and that's going to give it another chance to come together. I just want to make sure it's not all going to be seasoning one blob of cream cheese. Okay, so speaking of seasoning, very simple seasonings for this dish. I am using onion powder, garlic powder, salt, and pepper. You can add to that as much as you like. If you like it spicy, you could put some cayenne pepper. You could use lemon pepper and just eliminate most of these things. One spice does it all. So you can play around with it once you're comfortable to make it your own. This is how I'm doing it today. So I'm going to do basically a pinch each of the onion powder and the garlic powder. That works out to about 1/8 of a teaspoon. You don't really need a lot. It's just gonna be enough to give it a little extra flavor. We're seasoning the salmon too, so don't go crazy here or it's gonna be like way too much seasoning by the time it's done. Okay, so what did I do here? Onion powder, garlic powder, a little bit of pepper, same thing, 1 pinch. I am going to go in with double that for the salt, so this will be about 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt per serving. It's going to need that because a lot of the rich flavors, we've got the puff pastry, we've got the cheese that's in here, it's gonna need some of that salt to just kind of help cut through that. It'll brighten things up a little bit, the same way the lemon will. So now that we've got our seasoning kind of evenly distributed across the top, I'm going to go in and just give this one more quick mix. And now that will help to make sure that the seasoning is really well incorporated throughout this entire paste. And what's going to happen is as it cooks in the Salmon Wellington, the cream cheese is going to kind of melt down and become very velvety. And the Parmesan cheese, like I said, is going to get melty because it's a melting cheese. And it's going to help to really bind all of this together so that as you eat it, everything kind of stays together and every bite has a perfect bit of the spinach, of the salmon, of the puff pastry. It's a really cool glue. And it's a great way to eat your vegetables. This is a deceptive amount of spinach in here. Like you see 1/4 cup of frozen spinach and think it's not very much, but it's actually probably about 1 cup and a half of fresh spinach that condenses down and you get a full serving in just this little bit of frozen spinach. So don't be fooled. Okay, do I need the fork? No, I do not need the fork. We'll get rid of that. This is done. It's going to sit off to the side and we're just going to trade places and season the salmon. Try to get that straightened out so you can see what's going on. So we're going to do something called marrying our seasonings, and that just means everything that went in here is basically going on here as far as the spices go. So just like we used onion powder, garlic powder, salt, and pepper, we're doing the same thing with the salmon. So I'm going to just give the top a little sprinkle with onion powder, and again with the garlic powder. And to do a nice even sprinkle, you just flutter your fingers a little bit after you've pinched the spices, and that will help things to evenly distribute. Same thing with the pepper, little sprinkle here and there. And I'm just going to do 1 sprinkle across the top with the salt as well. We've already put quite a bit of salt in that filling now, so we just need a little bit to help season the salmon. And then I'm just going to flip it over and do the whole thing all over again. So onion powder, sprinkle, sprinkle, garlic powder, done. A little bit of pepper and a little bit of salt. All right, so at this point you're probably like, what happened to that puff pastry? I've got it in the fridge because it is so critical that the puff pastry stays nice and cold until the minute it goes in the oven. Puff pastry is basically butter and flour, and that's really all that's in it. So if that butter starts to melt, it's not going to puff up, which is why you don't see it here. But we're going to clear some of this stuff away. We're going to grab that puff pastry and I will show you how to fill it to make that Salmon Wellington. Okay, so I've cleaned up a little bit. I've grabbed that puff pastry that I talked about earlier, and it's time to fill it and turn it into a Salmon Wellington. So this is an entire sheet of puff pastry here. That's too much for 1 serving. So I am just going to start by taking this pastry and cutting it in half. I'm honestly just going to eyeball it. I can always stretch it out if it's not quite long enough, but hold on to that knife. I'm actually just gonna put it right back in the basket. Okay, so taking half of this pastry, I am going to unroll it onto a parchment lined baking sheet, and I cannot stress enough, line your baking sheet. Parchment is best because if any filling comes out, it's not going to stick. If you don't have parchment paper, your next best bet will be foil that you have greased. The puff pastry probably won't stick because it's got a lot of butter, but if any of this filling starts to leak out, that's where you might run into clinging, and you don't want that to happen because you might ruin this entire beautiful thing if it gets stuck. So this puff pastry is basically tri-folded, and I'm just going to pull it apart a little bit. And sometimes you have to work a little delicately, sometimes as it thaws, because it does come frozen, it'll kind of stick to itself, so try not to tear it. You might just have to be very patient. It's okay. Now the nice part is what's kind of tearing here is actually going to be the bottom, so if it starts to look a little wonky, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to see that part. It's still going to look beautiful when it's done. Okay, so this is basically our entire little package opened up, and we're going to fill it right in the middle. So I'm going to start by grabbing I want to use some tongs for this just to keep my hands clean. I'm going to grab this salmon fillet that we have already seasoned and just lay it right there in the middle. And you will see that it pretty much perfectly fits within the space of this puff pastry. That's a good thing. I'm just gonna get these tongs out of the way. Okay, so to this, we are now going to go in with our spinach filling that we made. So like I had mentioned, by the time it's done and has had a chance to sit, it almost becomes like a dough. And that's good because that makes it really, really easy to just kind of work it all together. And then I'm going to spoon it right into the middle of the salmon. And it's not even very sticky, which is nice because of all of the oily cheeses that are in it. And I'm just going to flatten it out a little bit to just try to get it to cover the salmon as well as possible. This is not an exact science. As it cooks, it is going to melt, so don't lose too much time here because, again, it's so important that your puff pastry stays cold. Don't fuss too much in this stage. Just get it on there, flatten it out a little bit. That's all you need to worry about. We will get that out of the way. I did get a little bit spinachy, so I'm just going to wipe off my hands. Okay. The next thing we need is a beaten egg, and this beaten egg is going to serve two different purposes. It's going to be a glue, and it's also going to be kind of like a paint, if you will. So what I'm going to do is just take this beaten egg as well as a little brush, get a little piece of spinach off of me here, and I'm just going to go around the edges very lightly. It doesn't need to be caked on, just enough to kind of get the edges wet. That's going to help everything to seal together when we fold it up and will help make sure that none of the filling comes out. Well, it'll at least try to help that. Every once in a while it happens anyway, despite your best efforts, but don't worry about it because again, most of the mess will happen on the bottom. Nobody will know but you. Okay, give it a little brush, again, right around the edges. I'm just going to make sure it's spread out because I don't want it to be too oozy, just to make sure that the puff pastry is easy to handle. Stay. There we go, got it. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is basically just tri-fold this like an envelope right over the salmon. One side over and the next side over. And so what that egg is going to do is it's going to help the puff pastry to stick to itself as it's cooking, and it'll kind of fuse it together. So at this point, you've got a little envelope. This is actually the bottom. So you're going to take this whole thing and very carefully pick it up, flip it over. Now nobody can see that seam. And I'm actually going to just rotate this 90 degrees because it's going to make it a lot easier to work. So try to get this in the middle. What you want to do is kind of use your hands and stretch that pastry over the salmon so that you get kind of some little wings or almost like the sides of a bow. And that is going to help make sure that everything really seals in there and creates a nice pocket for it. So what you're going to do next is you're going to take a fork and just work around the edges to help crimp it a little bit. This will do two things. It will make it look very pretty, and it's also going to help seal in those sides, again, mostly to stop that kind of leaking. This side is always a little bit harder because I'm using my left hand. Just for the sake of the camera, if it's you and you're cooking it, rotate it, use whatever your dominant hand is, that's fine. That looks pretty good. And don't worry if one side is maybe a little bit shorter than the other. As long as it's sealed really well, you don't have to worry. So at this point, it looks really nice, but we're actually not quite done. I'm going to grab that knife that I saved, and we want to cut some slits to vent. We're also going to make it look a little bit pretty right now. So I'm just going to do some little gentle diagonal cross hatches. You don't want to cut into your salmon. And I'm going to just go the other way. So right now it doesn't look super impressive, but what it's going to do is as it bakes, these little squares are going to puff up into pretty little diamonds and it will look so nice. Now we can get that knife out of the way. I am going to just move it a little bit though, so that the salmon is still pretty well covered. But what this is going to do is it's going to allow some steam to escape, and that will make sure it's nice and crisp and it doesn't get soggy as it cooks. So I mentioned the egg was first glue. Now it's going to become paint. You're just going to take this egg, and again, it's just one egg that I have beaten, and this one egg will very easily do several Salmon Wellingtons, so if you've just got the one egg in your fridge, that's all you need. You can make it work. If you do need to stretch it, you can add a tiny little splash of water to it, but don't go crazy because you really do want the egg to be able to bind. So what the egg is going to do is it is going to create a really nice glaze across the top, and as it bakes, it's going to turn really golden brown and really shiny. And that's what makes it look so beautiful. So again, working quickly because we don't want this pastry to get too warm. You do want to try to cover it as much as possible, and that way you get a nice even shine and a nice even browning while it cooks. Okay, save that egg, get rid of that pastry brush. This is now ready to go in the oven, and this right here is 1 serving. So whether you are making 1 or 10, you're just going to take this recipe and do it again and again and again. That's how you make your Salmon Wellingtons. To make sure this is nice and cold before it goes into the oven, I'm just going to take this whole thing and put it in the fridge for about 5 minutes. Once it's had a chance to chill and rest a little bit, it's going into an oven, 425 degrees, for about 20, maybe 25 minutes, but keep an eye on it. You do not want that puff pastry to burn. After your 20 minutes are up and it's golden brown, it is cooked inside and ready to eat. Okay, so the Salmon Wellington has been baking away for 20 minutes. It looks so beautiful. I can't wait to show you how great this looks. I am just going to open up the oven and get the salmon out. And because this pan is hot, I'm going to set it over here and then carefully try to move it over onto the cutting board for you. So I did let it cool a bit, but it is still warm. So be careful as you're handling yours because there's a lot of oil in the puff pastry. It's basically made out of butter. So this pastry gets very, very hot, as does the filling that's got all of the different cheeses in it. It's basically molten lava at this point. So be very, very careful while you're handling your Salmon Wellington. Now, at this point, you could absolutely plate it in this beautiful little package. And as you can see, it's got golden brown. It's got that nice glossy shine that we talked about. That's why we put that egg wash. It's why we cut those cross hatches. It's just got a very beautiful presentation. But there's also some really nice layers in there, and I do want to show you. So I'm just going to take a knife and very carefully, I find a serrated knife works really well for this if you have one, because it just helps to tear through that puff pastry without squashing it. So I'm just going to cut my way through there. Yes. And let's just get that whole knife out of the way. It has served its purpose. And now I'm going to give it a turn so you can see how gorgeous are those layers. So you have got your beautiful pink salmon, you've got the green and the white from the filling, and it's such a beautiful presentation, especially cut in half, because now you can see those gorgeous layers. So as far as plating goes, really, if you think about it, you've got a complete meal already in this little packet. You have got your protein from the salmon, you've got a full serving of spinach in there, and you've also, because of all of this puff pastry, basically got a really nice starchy side. So personally, I don't like to serve it with too much, but if you're looking for a very hearty meal, any side dishes that you like will work fine. Any kind of steamed vegetable, any kind of potato, rice, whatever you would normally like to serve as a side dish with fish, absolutely you can. But for me, I'm lucky if I can get through an entire one of these by myself. So for me, what I like to do, I'm just gonna move this out of the way. I like to just serve it with a side salad. So I've got a really beautiful spring mix here, just because it has a lot of nice colors in it. And what I like to do is just angle the salmon so that you've got it one way. I'll move this so you can see here. And then the other, you kind of just tilt at a bit of a jaunty angle, like so, just so that when you plate it and serve it, you can really see all of those different layers. And then, because it's seafood, it's always nice to serve a little wedge of lemon as a garnish, just like so, which again, because I'm serving it with a salad, I personally really like to take the lemon and squeeze it all over, because then it not only seasons your fish, but it dresses your salad as well. So you eat the whole Salmon Wellington, you eat your salad, you've got a beautiful meal. The salad's also kind of a nice way to lighten things up. So that's what I recommend. But again, it's your Salmon Wellington. You serve it however you like. But this right here is definitely a meal that says this is a special occasion while saving you a lot of time in the kitchen. And there you have it, a beautiful, warm, flaky Salmon Wellington, perfect for any special occasion. As always, this recipe can be found in the description below. Please like and subscribe for more videos. I'm Jessica. Thanks for watching.